You are listening to a Modern Nonprofit Podcast, a podcast for leaders of today's nonprofits. We focus on the most pressing issues in a modern nonprofit, from grant writing and fundraising to back office administration like accounting. If you are looking for tips and hacks to make your nonprofit more modern and intentional, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Tasha Anderson. I've worked with hundreds of nonprofits over many years in different capacities. First as an auditor, then a CFO of a nonprofit, and now I'm a CPA that owns the Charity CFO, an accounting firm working exclusively with nonprofit organizations. I'm passionate about trying to make the work of nonprofits even easier through the most modern practices I've learned from some of our most successful clients. Keep listening. Hello, nonprofit friends. Welcome back to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit Podcast. I'm the host, Tasha Anderson, and today I brought a new friend that I just met, Elias. Thank you so much for joining us. Elias, you are the author of a book that I think is really relevant to the space we're in right now. It's called Memorable, Profitable, and Virtual: How to Run a Virtual Conference, Conventions, and Trade Shows that Create Meaning. Elias, first and foremost, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. It's good to be here.
Good. And I am really excited about this conversation. Number one, the accountant in me that works with nonprofits, I'm always thinking of ways to get the biggest bang for our buck, for lack of a better word. Typical accountant, right? That I'm always looking at how can we still create meaning in the events that we're hosting as a nonprofit, but how do we make them an impactful way? And frankly speaking, I've seen over the last year or two, since we've gone back to in-person events that maybe historically were quite expensive. We had the benefit of saving a lot of those costs during the pandemic era when we switched to virtual events, and now we're back in full swing with full in-person events. And I just had a conversation last week with a board and said, Tasha, why are the event expenses, why is the net event proceeds so much less this year than it was in prior years? And they said, well, we have all those meals and all of those event expenses that we now have to pay for again. So that certainly impacts things. But you have done a lot of work in your career to kind of combat some of the maybe myths about virtual events, or at least to develop some tips on how to make them more successful. So let's dive right into that, Elias, if we can. Let's just talk about how to minimize the costs and maximize their revenue. It's not just, keeping costs low, but especially for those nonprofits that need to raise money, all of us, how do we maximize revenue while hosting either the full-on virtual events or these hybrid events? What are some of the things we've learned?
Yeah, it's been a real wild ride over the last couple of years, because if you think of the before times, before 2020, the default was to just get together in person. Right. And we didn't give it a second thought. I mean, the world looked like a completely different place. The idea that Zoom was not yet a verb, not everybody had a webcam, not everybody had a microphone. I mean, I've been working remote since 2011. I can tell you we are in a completely new era. And then when we had 2020 and everything that happened during that era, we all had to go online. And in many cases, not-for-profits, for-profits, didn't matter what kind of event was being run, we had to take it online because we didn't have a choice. Right. And we made the best with what we had. In some cases, it meant that we tried to directly replicate and overpromise what we could do. And by 2021, 2022, that format was starting to feel a little bit tired, the direct translation of in-person to online. And we were all starting to miss serendipity and bumping into each other in the hallways and, all the advantages that in-person purports to have. Now that the world has more or less opened up and we're back to normal, as some would say, there's been a rush to get back to in-person. And along with that rush to get back to in-person, there's also been this rush to say, well, we still want to have an online component, so we're going to go hybrid. And that's been the default route for a lot of organizations. Not-for-profit, for-profit, doesn't matter. A lot of organizations have said, you know what, we're going to do hybrid. And 2023 has been an amazing year for the event industry. And I use that term very carefully. It's been a great year for the event industry. Has it been a great year for those who are putting on events? That's the real test, because this year has been all about getting to meet one another again. And cost has sort of been, in the for-profit world, cost has been glossed over a little bit, but in a rising interest rate environment, that's going to change too. But
Mhm.
for not-for-profits, the conversation is now getting serious about how do we run these events? We
Mhm.
saw the American Astronomical Society, they did a blog post about how their 2023 event in Seattle was $1.6 million to put on. They
Mhm.
spent close to $500,000 on the audiovisual to go hybrid. Their Wi-Fi and internet costs were $147,000.
Yeah.
I mean, every dollar, and they're talking about how even with their ticket prices at $500 plus, I think their most expensive ticket tier was around $1,000. They're not breaking even on that.
Mhm.
So what we're starting to see is organizations are taking a serious hard look at what is their event format. Before
Mhm.
pandemic, it was all about in person. During pandemic, it was all about online. 2023 has been shift back to in person, business as usual, the way we've always done things. And now that the bill has come in, everybody's taking a serious look at is in
Yeah.
person providing the actual value that we thought it once was,
Mhm.
because it was the only option for a long time. So now we're starting to get into looking at more creative event formats and saying, where does virtual fit into our event portfolio? Where
Mhm.
does in person fit into our event portfolio? Does it make sense for us to do synchronous hybrid where the online attendees and the in person attendees are watching the same content at the exact same time?
Mhm.
And where can we start to not only save on costs, but deliver a better experience for our participants?
Mhm.
And if we can save on costs and deliver that great experience, that's extra money that we can put towards our cause or get through donations that we can use to, further our goals.
Exactly. We talk about costs in terms of, dollars and cents, I think in the quite literal way. But I was just thinking as you were talking about this, all of the energy and effort and resources from a human standpoint to put on these in-person events. And I just know from my experience serving on a board and even just having a small local gala is very time consuming from a volunteer standpoint. And I know because we work with several, kind of educational societies that host these kind of every other year conferences, and it's a massive undertaking from a labor perspective. And so I think kind of analyzing the opportunity cost from your human capital investment as well as actual dollars and cents. And I've often talked about events, you know, maybe a little controversial, but I've been always very skeptical of events because, on a financial report, you look at the actual dollars coming in and the actual dollars going out. But what we don't take into consideration are some of those opportunity costs that, like salaries and benefits and time and energy that could be redeployed in other ways. And maybe we'll get into a little bit later on options and how to make that a little bit more efficient for your team. But, I think while we're kind of analyzing the cost, and I think anyone running an organization would agree that hey, this is an area, the time investment that we don't really take into consideration. And frankly, I think sometimes leadership of nonprofits, they just go along with this idea of having these big events because it's just an expectation. It's the way we've always done it. The board would be in an uproar at this idea of not having, the annual gala that we always have. So I think now, like as you mentioned, Elias, is the time to kind of question, does this make sense? And what could be possible? What should that portfolio look like? So let's just say that this idea of hybrid, I've seen more and more conferences that I'm invited to. Less, you're right. I think conferences, yes, are giving more of a hybrid option. A lot of galas, especially here locally, there's just not even a hybrid option anymore. They've just gone, the pendulum has swung from completely hybrid to, or I'm sorry, completely virtual all the way back to completely in person. So for those organizations that are trying to do hybrid or maybe considering doing hybrid, what are some of the things they're getting wrong in your opinion? Should they be doing better?
Sure. I think when it comes, I'll take this in two parts because I want to address the gala side and the
Mm,
in-person side, how that pendulum has swung. I think it makes sense for something like a gala to be in person
mhm,
because that can be a chance, especially if you've got a small, intimate audience consisting maybe of executives, C-level, the movers and shakers, the people that can make a huge difference when it comes to the bottom line, people that you
mhm,
may want to have a much deeper relationship with. that's still going to have a place. I think a potentially scaled back version of that is where we're going to end up. But when it comes to organizations and what they're getting wrong with hybrid, I don't think it's, the more that I think about hybrid, the less I think it's organizations getting hybrid wrong, in that I think the traditional, I say traditional, we've been doing hybrid for 2 years.
Yeah.
The traditional synchronous model where we have, if you think of your typical conference, where you've got your keynote speech, and maybe you've got 3 or 4 breakout sessions, and then lunch, and then another 3 or 4 breakout sessions, and maybe a panel in the main room, and then we go and do networking. The traditional model where we're live streaming that from the event venue to everybody online, I don't know that that is a proven model that's going to work long term. I'm not convinced by that, aside from huge organizations, and I'm talking like Apple, Microsoft, who are reaching hundreds of thousands, millions of people with their events. I don't know that that's a model that's going to work just on a cost perspective alone. I've done the math with helping companies and not-for-profits do hybrid. We did a conference for a university back in 2021 and 2022. It was your typical academic conference. There were student papers, there were panel discussions, there were workshops. In 2021, it was all virtual. In 2022, we did synchronous hybrid. And the synchronous hybrid was a lot of work. And one of the only reasons that they were able to pull it off on time and on budget was, quite frankly, they brought us in, we were able to bring in our own gear, and we were able to keep the AV costs low. When you're looking at doing a hybrid event and just the sheer audiovisual that needs to be set up, in terms of labor hours you need to set up, tear down that equipment, in terms of you can't just have one technician going around to the different rooms making sure that everything works. You now need a live streaming technician monitoring each room as you're going. If you've got 3 rooms and you're doing an 8-hour conference day, 3 times 8, that's 24 hours per day that the AV company is going to need to pay out, which means that's 24 hours of billable effort they're going to bill to you. Not to mention that the equipment that you need, these streaming rigs are not cheap to put together. I mean, some of these streaming rigs could be as much as $50,000, $100,000 to put together. So the AV company is going to need to recoup those costs. So just on a dollars and cents level, the scale that you need to reach to do synchronous hybrid well, I don't know that you'll ever recoup those costs. I don't know that that business model makes sense, especially in a venue where the setup has to be wheeled in, set up, and torn down every single time. What I'm starting to see is there are smaller venues. I'm seeing this in more rural communities. There are smaller venues that have all of that hybrid gear already set up. So they've gone and made the investment. They've put in cameras. They put in a lighting system. They put in a sound system. They have a staff that's ready to crew all of this stuff. And the advantage for the not-for-profits is you are now not paying for that setup and teardown time. Are your audiovisual on an hourly labor cost maybe a little bit more than your big box convention center? Yes. But you've got the advantage that all that gear is set up, battle tested, ready to go. You avoid the glitches. You're in a venue that's custom built for that event. Usually it's in some sort of a repurposed venue, like a former, I know of one in a community, they took a former church, renovated the entire inside, installed a hybrid setup. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful venue to live stream out of. It looks good, it sounds good, and it makes sense to do hybrid there. There's also the issue of consolidation at a lot of these event venues where there may be one exclusive provider of audiovisual, and as we all know, the second you deal with a monopoly, you deal with the monopoly setting whatever price they want. And your option is to pay it or go somewhere else.
Right.
So I think it's less about what are the event organizers getting wrong and more about, does the business model of a synchronous hybrid where everybody's consuming the same content at the same time, does that make sense? And the follow-up question to that is, does that event format even make sense in the first place? In other words, what are you gaining from doing that that you wouldn't otherwise get?
Exactly.
So I look at that and go, during pandemic, we went on Zoom because we had no choice. After pandemic, does seeing everybody's entire body beside their slides make the experience any better? Versus what are the feedback surveys keep saying about what works and what is awesome about in person. And we get back to those making connections,
Hmm.
meeting the right people, having those opportunities to deepen relationships. So I
Yeah.
think it's time, in my opinion, I think it's time for a rethink of the way we're just doing events in general.
Mhm. So that brings me, I think, to my next question, and all solid points with the hybrid. I just know whether it's hybrid events or otherwise, even a hybrid workforce, like how we operate internally is a bit challenging and making sure you have the right gear and the right assumptions on where everybody's going to be and expectations on how we're going to use it. So how does a nonprofit, going back to the event, how do they decide, based on some of the points that you just mentioned, does it make sense to be hybrid? Does it make sense to be full on virtual? Or does it make sense to be in person? We've dabbled on, kind of galas and small scale, maybe in person, but maybe kind of bigger picture. How would you advise, a nonprofit to go down that decision tree?
Sure, whether we go full virtual, full online, or full virtual, full in person, full hybrid.
Yeah.
So here's a line of thinking. Here's a thought experiment. In the before times, it was very frequent that you saw a not for profit or a for profit. They would host one major event per year. And
Mhm.
many times that event would be your core fundraiser. This is where we raise the
Right.
majority of our money each year, right?
Yep.
Accurate characterization.
Very accurate.
So
Still the case.
yeah. So still the case that a lot of organizations, they have one cornerstone event. That's their huge event each year. That's what they use to raise all of their money or the majority of their
Hmm.
money for that year, along with the fundraisers that go on throughout the year. And
Hmm.
everything leads up to this big cornerstone event. The world itself is moving at a breakneck pace when you think about it. So, and the way that I know how to describe that is 2 or 3 years ago, AI was on nobody's radar except for the
Hmm.
academics. And
Hmm.
today, my dad is using ChatGPT to write his emails.
Hmm.
Like AI has turned into a commodity. And you think about over 2023, how fast AI
Hmm.
itself has moved and gone from niche curiosity to I can't live without this.
Yeah.
The world is the exact same place. So when you think about we're going to have maybe a 1 or 2 day event, that's our cornerstone event. Okay, so that's 2 days out of a 365-day year. What are
Hmm.
you doing throughout the rest of the year to activate your audience? And
Hmm.
and if I put my business hat on, my for-profit hat on for a second, in the for-profit world, one of the biggest challenges or one of the biggest um, goals is to get to a place where you have monthly recurring revenue, MRR,
Right.
because that helps smooth out the the peaks and valleys of your revenue stream so that your workflows get more predictable, you can
Hmm.
forecast it a little bit easier, you have some stability in your business. Also banks like it because hey, it shows that you're going to have capacity to pay off your small business loans.
Hmm.
So in the world of 2023 and beyond, where meeting twice out of 365 days a year is a long time to go, the idea that we need to have just one event per year is starting to feel a bit old fashioned. And it's
Hmm.
leaving a lot of money on the table, figuratively and literally,
Yes.
the rest of the year. Because when we
Yeah.
think about what is an event, not to get super philosophical, but what is an event? Well, it's an opportunity for us to get people together around some sort of a cause or an occasion. Well,
Hmm.
chances are throughout the year, you have opportunities where you can talk with your audience. And it doesn't have to be like a 2 or 3 day gala event.
Hmm.
These can be as simple as live streams, webinars, a focused 1 day seminar or deep dive on a particular
Hmm.
topic. And because
Hmm.
we now have that virtual technology, the
Hmm.
cost for you to set those kinds of events up and the potential upside for your revenue stream or for your donation stream is very high. Plus, it gives you an opportunity to test out new topics that you otherwise might not do at an in-person event.
Hmm.
Because in-person event, the stakes are high. It's expensive. You're asking people to fly. You're asking people to travel. So
Hmm.
you're going to be more tempted to stick to what's safe and what's known. But on a virtual event, you've got a lot more opportunity to try out new topics. So
Yeah.
what I would say about virtual versus in-person versus hybrid is the deeper question is how many events are you doing per year to activate your audience?
Hmm.
Because and on a competitive level too is every day that you're not providing a reason to activate your audience is a day that a competitor can come in and start to activate and take away your audience to their cause or to their line of business.
Right. I
So
could
I would,
just, yeah. No,
go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. I love that idea. And not sure you intended it, but what comes to my mind is this Cornerstone Gala where that's really I've seen this so many times. That's the only time we interact with our donor. We send the save the date, we send the invitation. I go to a lot of these events. I donate to a lot of different nonprofits. I've yet to have like a phone call to like personally also invite me, especially if I've given, like a table sponsorship or something like this. Then you either attend the event or you don't attend the event. You hear nothing else from these organizations other than maybe like, I don't know, an annual report or something like this. And I'm just thinking, yeah, I guess if that makes sense to be your cornerstone event, but how could that look differently if you were able to engage in your audience in a different way? And I'm just thinking of it strictly from like a donor database, but I could also see if you were a member of some sort of association and you do this conference and other sorts of ways to get engaged. But I've seen this so many times where we put all of our eggs in one basket from a fundraising standpoint. And I'm thinking of a couple organizations off the top of my head where that's all they do from like a cultivation of their donor database. It's just that one event, and that's pretty much it. Or typically an organization will have one group of people that will go to the gala, it's a higher cost and enter, and then they'll have something else, maybe it's like a golf tournament or a trivia night or something that's typically a lower cost to enter. But really those are kind of different populations of people, and they're really only interacting or engaging with those audiences like separately, sort of once a year, and that's it. And then they wonder why the donor attrition rate is what it is, or that the average gift has not gone up, or donors have kind of ghosted and fallen off, to your point, because someone else might be um, you know, engaging with them in a different way, in a more intentional way, in a more frequent way. So,
well, here's something else that I've ran into. So I've also, when I talk about events and event production, part of my background is on the audiovisual side. Like I live in the tech world. I'm a programmer by trade. I've done events since high school on the AV side, so I know my way around there. But I've also hosted events and events that were kind of had a not-for-profit focus. One issue that we continually ran into, and I'm curious to see if anybody else has run into this issue, is you approach a company and you say, we'd love to have your sponsorship or we'd love to have your support. And, you're talking with their CFO and they're like, this is such a great cause. We love what you're doing, but our fiscal year ends in December and we've already allocated our funding.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about, think about this. If you've got your gala at the same time every single year and you've already got those established relationships with your sponsors or with your donors, that's fantastic. They have you budgeted in and you're going to get X number of dollars for them. But if you're trying to cultivate new donors and new supporters and new sponsors, when you have an event every single month or, once a quarter, or however frequently you want to do it, either virtual or in person, you have more opportunities to have your event land on their calendar when they're planning for that next fiscal year so that they can budget your organization into their, however it fits into their objectives and goals for that year.
Yeah.
Along with virtual, and this is a trick I think a lot of folks miss, is to start thinking about virtual as a pipeline to your in-person events. What a big trend I'm starting to see is a lot of the in-person events that are doing well. The common theme is small, intimate, exclusive. And I'm talking about companies will do say if they're talking about their cornerstone event, they'll do 2 or 3 days of online content, but their in-person side will be capped at maybe 50 participants. A small enough room that you could potentially meet everybody. They will bring in the A-level speaker, somebody that's more than a keynote. They're an industry insider or an industry professional. There'll be a dinner gala and a discussion with this speaker and a chance for everybody in the audience to pick their brain. And I'm thinking about one client that we worked with in particular. What they did was we hosted a webinar for them. They since created a training course around artificial intelligence based off of this webinar. And that webinar turned into a pipeline for their big in-person executive retreats. where you spend a day with these subject matter experts and a day in a room with all of these A-level leaders. I'm talking like C-suite from Fortune 500s and major financial institutions.
Yeah, right.
And they're using virtual as a pipeline to in person.
Interesting. Yeah. I love the idea, monthly recurring revenue you mentioned. I use that word in my business quite a bit, especially with our clients. I know that nonprofits are really looking to get, their monthly giving campaigns or something that will smooth out some of that, cyclical or seasonal nature of fundraising. How have you seen online events used to kind of leverage some sort of ongoing, revenue stream? Maybe what are some ways that nonprofits have turned, like you said, that virtual event or even hybrid event into something that's more ongoing and continue to build that donor database?
Sure. So I've seen a couple of strategies work fantastic. One strategy I've seen, and the event that I think has gotten it kind of the most right that sticks out in my mind is I love video games. I play video games a fair amount. You've probably checked out Games Done Quick. I don't know if you've heard of them. They raise money for Doctors Without Border, Médecins Sans Frontières. And each year they raise like $1 to $2 million for MSF. But then throughout the year, they have these smaller streams called GDQ Hotfix, where they will be testing out new technology, new equipment, bringing in and testing new streamers, but they'll also be raising money during those smaller streams. Their big event, the Summer Games Done Quick and the Winter Games Done Quick, those are the big cornerstone events that raise $1 to $2 million for MSF. But then the smaller streams are what they use to build up their audience, touch their audience on a regular basis, and raise some funds. One of the keys with the MSF, with the GDQ streams that they do, is there's a big incentive. They have a lot of donation incentives. For example, if we hit $20,000 by 5 p.m. on Thursday, then we're going to be adding in these extra events, or there's giveaways. They're constantly shouting out donations on stream from as little as $5 to as big as $50,000. They'll read out people's comments. It'll be very interactive. So it's a chance for you to get your little bit of moment of fame. It's like, hey, I got shouted out on stream, and also kind of use the donations as a remote control for how do we want this event to go. But an emphasis is on it being interactive and activating the community. So that's been a huge strategy, and that's a buzzword that started to creep up in the event world as well, which is the idea of creating not just events but having a community around your brand. And social media is opening fantastic opportunities for activating community around your brand. It's no longer just a one-way street where we talk at our audience and ask them for donations once a year. It's an opportunity for us to actually, talk to the human beings on a regular basis, see what their difficulties and struggles are, get their ideas, and, really engage with them on a human-to-human level. So that's a strategy I've seen work. Other not-for-profits I've worked with, they will take, if they're doing an educational conference, for example, they will take the content that we have recorded for their virtual or their hybrid event. They'll further monetize that. So they'll sell replays. That can be a fantastic way to generate recurring revenue. I've also seen some smaller, this is more on the indie side, but it could be applicable, especially if you're doing education. Instead of selling individual replays or individual conference replays, they will sell a yearly subscription, kind of like a Netflix for creators. Julius Solaris, the event professional extraordinaire who wrote the foreword to my book, he's the founder of Bold Push, and he has Bold Push Plus. And so if you subscribe to Bold Push Plus, you get access to his events, you get access to all of their business intelligence and research around events. Everything that they publish, you get access to. It's like the Netflix for event professionals, which is a fantastic resource. So that's another way that you can generate more recurring revenue or monetize your audience. And along with that is every single event that you do, if you're recording that, like we're recording our podcast right now, you're going to have a ton of opportunity to take bits and pieces of this podcast, turn it into YouTube shorts, turn it into TikTok videos, turn it into Instagram reels.
Right.
So many educational conferences, especially in the not-for-profit world, are sitting on a treasure trove of content that if you ship that off to, you think about if you've got a 3-day event and you've got maybe 4 hours of content each day, you have minimum 12 hours of content that you can repurpose. Yeah, you can repurpose into newsletters. You can repurpose into short form content. You can repurpose into long form content. I have seen many times where this was one of my favorite experiences. I remember we had a conference talk that was 60 minutes long. We had 10 minutes for live QA. We had, I think, 90 questions come in. And it wasn't like 90 of the same questions. It was there were, I think there were 70 unique questions.
Wow.
And we got time to answer maybe 2 of them, right? And the organizers came to me. They're like, well, what do we do with the remaining, 68 questions? And I said, you have a newsletter, right? There's your newsletter topics for the next 2 years.
Wow.
If you're sending one a week, right? There's your conference topics. We saw that with a client that was doing a not-for-profit conference, their yearly summit. And one of their sessions, one of their best attended sessions, most commented sessions, was all about prefabricated housing. How do we build, how do we mass produce housing so that we can bring costs down across the whole housing stack, but still achieve net zero? And when they saw how popular this session was, they said, maybe there's some demand for a conference all about prefabricated housing. So they did it, and it was one of their most profitable conferences ever. Wow. And now they have a whole trove of content that they can repurpose, they can resell. And if your organization is able to offer continuing education hours, I mean, everybody always needs CE hours for their professional organization, right?
Right.
So these are all options, avenues that you can take to further monetize your content directly and then indirectly through social media content and outreach, right?
Yeah. So more of a practical question for you. You obviously get involved in these virtual events by, kind of your expertise and putting these on. But let's say you're an organization that is very traditional, old school, like done it, the same way every time. And you're feeling inspired after listening to this conversation. And you're like, you know what, we need to do a mass overhaul. But I'm immediately just completely flooded and overwhelmed with, where do I even begin? So you had mentioned briefly some strategists that work specifically on event space. You talked about building a community, which I think is amazing ideas. Where would you advise like a leader of a nonprofit? I'm just thinking of these new hungry leaders that are really wanting to implement some sort of change, or maybe a director of development. It's like, look, I have a lot of work to do. I want to be more of a modern player in this space. Where have you seen some of these organizations that are starting from the ground zero? What is like the first step before we leap into, production of like hybrid events? But it's like, we need to go from here to there. Is it maybe connecting with a strategist, or what's been kind of your experience? I think the most practical first step.
Sure. I'll describe it with the biggest mistake I see organizations make. And it is saying to the director of marketing or the chief marketing officer or whoever's responsible for their sales and marketing to say, go run an event, go put on our events. And all of a sudden that whole, the event falls into their portfolio. They gather a kind of a board of directors or a committee to run the event. These folks have their full-time jobs on top of whatever else they're doing. And now they have to put on an event.
Right.
The result is by the time the event is done, everybody's burned out and needs a week off.
Right.
If the event happens in the first place. And if it does, you're taking so much time and effort out of these people's lives to dedicate towards doing these events. And I've also seen where this path has started to lead as well is I have noticed a pattern of major cornerstone event is done, and a month later, half of the committee that was involved with that event resigns from the organization. It's a pattern I've noticed a few times. It's the first time I saw it, I went, oh, that's interesting. And I've seen it about 4 or 5 times on different feeds. And now it catches my attention because that's the amount. When you think about the complexity of a modern event now, like think back to the 1980s, an event was, AAP talks about this. The AAS talks about this. The complexity of a event before we had laptops, before we had cell phones, before we had any of that stuff, you might just need a room.
Right.
We didn't have video projectors. We didn't
Right.
have, you might have needed a screen for an overhead transparency,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
that might have
Uh-huh.
been as you need a screen, a overhead projector, and a flip chart. Low
Right.
cost stuff, simple.
Right. Hmm.
Now, if you want to do a modern production, we're talking about staging, skirting for the staging, lighting, audio.
Hmm.
We need a projector. We need microphones. We need sound reinforcement. We might need a crew to live stream this. We might have an online audience. Like, the amount of complexity is intense. Then you have getting all the, shipping all the materials on site and the signage and printing everything up and coordinating the speakers and their flights and where are they going to stay.
Right. Right.
And then we've got all the food and the dietary
Hmm.
restrictions and how many plates are we going to have, and we need to over allocate just in case we have some last minute signups and
Right.
staff on site. And if you have, I mean, we've had events, hybrid events, where we had security concerns, where
Right.
we had one event where there was where we were on day one, we were on high alert because there was a high level speaker and there was a disgruntled employee that was trying to gain access to this speaker, and we
Hmm.
had to, and that was complex. It was a
Right.
complex security situation. So the modern event is a very complex organism. And
Yes.
to put that on the laps of folks that may not be event industry professionals, it's setting them up for failure, and it's setting them
Right.
up to get less out of their event than they could. And I mean,
Hmm.
this will sound like a bit of a shameless plug, but the big thing is you need to have somebody that owns your event portfolio these days. Like
Hmm.
the best organizations have somebody, and whether you have that internal or you contract that out to somebody, you need to have somebody on staff who is responsible. They are your event coordinator, they're your event planner, whatever role
Hmm.
they have, they own that event portfolio with the
Hmm.
goal of being one event ahead at all times.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
that leads into another huge mistake I see organizations make is we get to the end of the conference. We had a phenomenal time. We beat our fundraising goals. This was amazing.
Right.
See y'all next year.
Right. Right.
And they fail to capture the excitement and take advantage of that because there's
Hmm.
always something coming up next, right?
Hmm.
Some of the best events I've seen say, you know what? And by the way, we're holding our next event 3 months from now. Tickets are on sale right now. And if you sign up today or tomorrow, in the next 24 to 48 hours, you get so much off and you get all these perks,
Hmm.
blah, 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 blah. You capture and take advantage of that excitement.
Right.
You don't have to have much fleshed out to take advantage of that, but you need to have something. And the only way that you're going to do that is if you have somebody that is responsible for that event portfolio.
Right.
Whether they're under the marketing wing, that can make sense. They're going to work with marketing, they're going to work with sales at some point.
Hmm.
Like they don't just live in their own silo. Everybody's got to work together on this.
Yeah.
But you need to have somebody on staff that owns and makes sure that the events happen. If you're
Yeah.
putting execution of the event in the laps of your chief marketing officer, your head of marketing, your head of sales, you're setting them up for failure.
Right.
And so
Well, and
that would be my
yeah.
biggest piece of advice.
Well, that's helpful. I think I love a lot of what you said. And I also, as a person that has served on a board and different committees, what I also see nonprofits do is delegate the responsibility of event execution to a volunteer committee of either community volunteers, board members. These are not people that are experts in event production. If you're going to have an event, figure out a way to organize it in such a way, to your point, that you're not going to have all these committee members burn out, these staff members burn out. We put so much energy and effort into kind of one big event, and then you've depleted, everyone else's contribution in other areas, right? So when you think marketing person, it's full on event planning. That probably means they're not going to be able to do other things that are really important to continue going. So I've already ordered your book, Elias, but again, for those that are listening, I know lots of good information. This has been extremely helpful. For me, a lot of good little nuggets to think about. Like I said, in the roles that I've played with organizations, not just as their accountant, but also as a board member and volunteer and, an event guest and all of the things. So for those that want to get a copy of your book, again, it's Memorable, Profitable, Virtual: How to Run Virtual Conferences, Conventions, and Trade Shows that Create Meaning, Value, and Lasting Connections. Where's the best place to find more of that information or buy a copy of that book, Elias?
Well, it's available on Amazon, as all fine books are. So if you look up Memorable, Profitable, Virtual on Amazon, you'll find it right away. If you look up Memorable, Profitable, Virtual on Google, chances are it'll be the first hit anyway. You can also go to my website, tractusevents.com/book. I believe we'll link that in the show notes for this episode. So, and then if you check me out on my various social medias, I've got links plastered everywhere to the book. Included with the book as well is inside I've dropped some links to extra resources. For example, when you're planning an event, what should your agenda look like? Sample communication templates, facilitator guides. And if you're looking right now, I should also mention this, and we'll make sure to link this, is if you are planning an in-person or a hybrid event and you haven't yet signed with your venue, I have a free 64-point venue tech checklist available on my site that you can use to help qualify and vet your venues.
Right.
So I'll make sure that we drop the link in the show notes, but that's also available, tractusevents.com/resources/venue.
Perfect.
So that'll help you avoid some pitfalls that we've seen our clients run into with picking a venue. And as well, I'm available for consults if you're not sure where to start, if you're not sure, like, how do I look for a good event planner? How do I look for a good venue? What does our event strategy look like? I just got handed a venue contract. I have no idea if it's good.
Right.
That can save you a ton of cash.
Absolutely. So I know that I've learned a lot in this conversation, and I already know a few people. I plan on sending this conversation link out once the podcast goes live. So thank you again for all of your, tips, tricks, and insight on this space. It's definitely foreign to most of us that obviously are not in the events planning space, which I think most of our listeners would raise their hand and said, I'm not an expert. I'm not trying to be an expert. I need all the help I can get. So thank you again for joining us. And for everybody listening, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you found this conversation helpful. And also leave a rating, leave some sort of review. That helps other people find content like ours that will help not just you, but other followers and nonprofit leaders. So, Elias, thank you again for joining us. Until next time, thanks, everyone. Thank you for listening to a Modern Nonprofit podcast powered by the Charity CFO. If your nonprofit is needing help with accounting or bookkeeping, head on over to thecharitycfo.com to find information on the work we are doing with other nonprofits. If you found this information helpful, please give us a 5-star rating on your podcast streaming platform so other nonprofit leaders can find us. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.